Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unnamed Church. Wherever you are, this is the right place to worship God. But today, I want to talk about God's provision. However, you know what? God's provision is perfect. So I want to talk about God's perfect provision. You know, in faith journey, we have many times to make a decision whether we're going to follow God's guidance or just go to the path that we think that's good. However, I want to highly recommend you to make a decision to follow God's guidance no matter what. Even though you feel like, oh, I don't think that's the right path. Is it really okay? Financially, I will get trouble. Or I don't think that's so really past that I can go. I don't have enough energy or I don't have any qualification. You might have a lot of things to think about when you want to make a decision to follow God's guidance. However, I want to say, trust God's provision. God's provision for you is going to be prepared. Once you decide to follow God's guidance, then when you need it, God will provide. So I want to share one Bible verse. Exodus 16, verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. I want to explain a little bit of the background of this verse. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and led them to the promised land. God is guiding them to go, right? So on the way, after they got out of Egypt, it's less than 2 months, they start to feel so difficult and challenged to continue to follow God's guidance, going through the desert. You know, do you have any time that you feel like, it's my dry season. It feels like I'm going through the desert. I can't continue to go this way. Have you ever felt that? Or have you ever experienced that season that you feel like, oh, it's so tough. God, what is this? I can't continue. I need something. I need this and I need that. You know, it's like that. The Israelites, they start to complain. What is this? We can find any food. We can find any, water easily. Maybe it could be better to stay in Egypt. They start to complain to Moses and Aaron, who is Moses' brother. And God knew what they need because that's God's guidance. God guided them to go through that desert to the promised land. So God knew what they need. That's why God was saying this verse. God will provide, bread from heaven, which is called manna. I'm sure you heard about manna, right? However, here we really need to think about when you face some season that you have to trust God's provision, then you really need to trust God's provision 100%, not 50%, 70%, or 90%. You have to trust God's provision 100%. When God gave them manna, God wanted to see and test them whether they trust God or not, whether they trust God's provision, everyday provision or not. So let me share one more time. Let me read it one more time. You know, then the Lord said to Moses, because, the Israelites start to complain, I will rain down bread from heaven for you, which is manna, right? The people are to go out each day. Each day, is it every, it's it, one day, or, every day? You know the answer. Each day is every day, right? And gather enough for that day. How many days? 10 days? 15 days? No. Only for that day, only for today. In this way, I will test them. God wanted to test their faith, trusting God's provision. When you trust God's provision, that's why you need to trust 100%. Okay, God, feed me today. Then God will feed me tomorrow. And God will feed me next week and next month. Likewise, when you go through that season to rely on God's provision, you have to trust 100%. Okay, God will provide me. Like the Israelites, God say that I will provide the manna every day. Just go out each day. Just gather enough for that day, today. However, if you don't have a faith that, okay, tomorrow God is going to provide, then how are you going to do? Then maybe, there are manna here. Wow, not sure if tomorrow it will be provided or not. Then you will start to gather a lot more than you need for that day, right? Then that's a lack of faith. And God will be like, oh, come on. I'm going to provide it tomorrow too. You don't need to do that. You don't need to gather a whole bunch. Just have it for only today, you know? So likewise, yes, we don't know about tomorrow. That's why the faith is required. Can you, if you see, the bunch of food now, what faith is required, you know? But because you cannot see tomorrow, next week, next month, how my life would go, that's why you need to trust God's provision 100% and say that, yes, Lord, I will trust your provision. It will be coming tomorrow, next week, next month, until I finish this season to rely on your provision. God's provision is perfect. You know why? Because God knows when to provide. At the same time, God knows when to stop His provision. So let me share one more Bible verse. It's really interesting. So Joshua 5:12. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites. But that year they ate the produce of Canaan. Wow. You know what? When I read this verse, it's amazing. I was really amazed. There we go. This is God. God knows when to provide, and also God knows when to stop His provision. Isn't that perfect? Let me just highlight. Can you see the manna? We talked about manna, right? Provided to the Israelites in the desert, following God's guidance to Canaan. But you know what? Once they enter, the promised land, the manna stopped. The day after they ate this food from the land. God knows when to stop His provision. Probably If you feel like now you're going through some tough season that you really need to trust God's provision, but know that that season will be finished at some point. And God will provide daily manna for you until the season finish. So trust God's provision, and God finish His provision when you can figure out, okay, now I know, now I can do this. God is gonna provide every day, you know. So the verse, there was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan, the promised land. I know sometimes it's challenging to continue to follow God's, guidance, because you might have many, some challenging time. However, just trust that God will provide at the right time. And also, God will lead you to the promised season that you are okay. Then you can just figure out, how to live. That's God. God knows when to provide, and God knows when to stop at the right time. Our job is to trust His provision when I need, and trust the time that this tough season will be finished, and the new season that I can work, I can have something from somewhere. Yeah, feel like, yeah, now I know. Then God's provision will be stopped presently. I pray and I hope that you will experience God's amazing provision that is perfect. God's provision is for you. In Jesus' name, God bless you. Bye bye.